The deputy told me to step away from my own dock, while 34 strangers stood behind him holding blue HOA lake passes. Maribel Forsyth pointed toward my cabin and said, "He has been interfering with legal community access all morning." Then she handed the deputy a glossy brochure offering fishing, kayaking, and private shoreline use on a lake worth $2.8 million. She looked completely certain. That was her first mistake. And be honest, if a deputy told you to leave property your family had owned for decades, would you stay calm enough to reach for the deed, or would you lose your temper right there? I did not argue, raise my voice, or ask anyone to trust me. I opened the weatherproof folder under my arm, removed the recorded deed, and said, "Deputy, before you remove me, please check the county parcel map." He entered the parcel number into the computer inside his patrol vehicle, while Maribel reminded him that she was president of Crescent Quay Estates. A few seconds later, his expression changed. He looked at the screen, looked across the water, and then turned toward her. "Ma'am," he said, "who exactly sold these people access to his lake?" Maribel stopped smiling. "Let me back up. My name is Landon Clark Renshaw, and I had owned Greyhook Lake Preserve for nearly 18 years by the morning this happened. The property covered the lake bed, the shoreline, the old cedar dock, a small cabin, and the gravel road connecting the land to the county highway. My father had bought the place long before expensive homes appeared beyond the eastern ridge. He taught me to fish from that dock, repair washed-out gravel after storms, and keep every property document where I could find it quickly. "People remember stories," he used to say. "The courthouse remembers paper." I never forgot that. After he passed, the lake became more than acreage on a tax bill. It was where I went when life felt too loud. The mornings smelled like wet pine and cedar boards, and the only traffic usually came from deer crossing the road before sunrise. I handled most repairs myself, paid the property taxes every year, insured the road and dock, and kept copies of the deed in 3 places. It was quiet. Then Crescent Quay arrived. At first, the new development did not bother me. Their home sat beyond my eastern boundary, and the sales signs promised peaceful Ozarks living without mentioning my name or my property. That changed when blue windshield passes began appearing at my gate. The first vehicle carried an older couple who honestly believed their annual HOA dues included lake access. I showed them the private property sign, explained that the association had no agreement with me, and let them turn around without making the moment uncomfortable. 2 more vehicles arrived the following weekend. Then 6 came the weekend after that. Something organized was happening. I installed a gate camera, photographed the passes with permission, and called the county recorder to confirm that no easement, lease, or public access right had been filed without my knowledge. The clerk checked twice. Nothing existed. That should have ended it. Instead, a certified letter arrived from Maribel claiming the lake had been historically understood as a community amenity. It included no deed, no survey, no permit, and no recorded easement. I replied in writing, attached the parcel map, and clearly told the board to stop selling access. They signed for the letter. Then they kept selling passes. By the time the deputy arrived, 34 households had paid for a right the HOA did not own. Maribel believed the number of families standing behind her made her position stronger. What she did not understand was that every pass, every brochure, every camera image, and every certified notice was creating a record. She had brought law enforcement to pressure me off my own land. Instead, she had just given me my first neutral witness. After the deputy left that morning, I did not spend the rest of the day arguing with anyone. I spent it walking the shoreline the same way my father always did after the first cool week of autumn, stopping every few yards to look at the dock, the retaining stones, and the old gravel road that curved through the trees before reaching the county highway. The lake looked exactly the way it had looked when I was 10 years old, with mist floating above the water and sunlight slipping through the sycamore branches. But something felt different because I now knew strangers believed this place belonged to someone else. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. My father used to say that land remembers the people who care for it, and maybe that sounds old-fashioned today, but every fence post, every culvert, and every board on that dock had a story attached to it. We never hired expensive crews whenever something small broke, because we fixed most of it ourselves. We replaced warped planks after heavy winters. We cleared fallen trees after thunderstorms. We spread fresh gravel every spring because rain always carved little channels through the road. None of those jobs made headlines. They made ownership real. I unlocked the gate and drove slowly toward the cabin, passing the weathered mailbox that still carried our family name in faded black letters. The cabin was small by modern standards, with a screened porch that squeaked whenever someone stepped across the loose boards. But every room held something that mattered more than expensive furniture. My father's fishing hat still hung beside the door. His old tackle box still sat beneath the workbench in the boathouse. Even the coffee mug he used every Saturday morning remained on the highest shelf because I had never found a good reason to move it. Some people inherit money. I inherited responsibility. Before sunset, I carried a heavy metal lockbox onto the kitchen table and opened the folders inside one by one. The original deed rested in a plastic sleeve beside tax records, old dock permits, survey drawings, maintenance receipts, and photographs dating back decades. My father believed paperwork deserved the same care as the property itself because memories disappear when people pass away, but county records can protect a family long after voices are gone. I finally understood why he repeated that lesson so often. I scanned every important document again, uploaded fresh copies to secure cloud storage, saved encrypted backups onto 2 separate drives, and placed one drive inside the cabin safe while the other went into my truck. It took most of the evening. It was worth every minute. If there was going to be a legal fight, I wanted every page ready before the first lawyer asked for it. That was not fear. That was preparation. The next morning, I walked to the entrance of the property carrying 2 new signs I had ordered months earlier but never bothered to install because nobody had ever challenged the boundary before. Each sign simply read, "Private property. No public lake access. Owner permission required." They were not angry signs. They were honest ones. I photographed each sign after mounting it beside the gate, recorded the date and time, and saved the pictures with my property files because my father had taught me another quiet lesson many years ago. If you ever improve a boundary or post a notice, keep proof that you did it. Small details often become important later. Before driving back toward town, I called the county records office to confirm that the digital parcel map matched the most recent survey on file. The clerk was polite, checked the information, and said everything appeared consistent with the ownership history going back many years. Hearing that did not surprise me. It gave me confidence. As I pulled away from the office parking lot, I realized something else had changed. This was no longer about convincing Maribel she was wrong. It was about building such a complete record that nobody, not a deputy, not a board member, and not even a courtroom full of strangers, would have to guess where the truth lived. The more I looked into Crescent Quay Estates, the less this felt like one person making a bad decision. It looked like an entire plan that had been polished until it sounded completely reasonable to people who never thought to ask one simple question. Who actually owned the lake? That question changes everything in a property dispute, but it almost never appears in a glossy brochure. A few days after the deputy visited my property, I drove through the neighborhood without stopping, keeping to the public streets and paying attention to details instead of assumptions. Fresh landscaping surrounded the entrance. New banners advertised peaceful mornings, kayaking, and outdoor living. Families walked their dogs. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. It looked like the kind of community anyone would want to join. That was exactly the point. The sales office displayed a large map mounted on the wall where blue water stretched across the background behind photographs of smiling residents carrying fishing poles and kayaks. The words Lake Heritage Lifestyle appeared across the top in elegant lettering, and a smaller paragraph promised exclusive recreational access for participating residents. It sounded impressive. It also carefully avoided saying who owned the lake. I noticed that immediately. Marketing is often written as much for what it leaves out as for what it includes. Before leaving, I picked up a brochure from the public display rack because anyone could take one without asking permission. It slipped neatly into the folder I kept on the passenger seat beside my camera and notebook. Evidence does not always arrive in dramatic ways. Sometimes it is printed on glossy paper. Later that afternoon, I met my attorney, Rowena Page Calder, in her office overlooking the courthouse square. She listened without interrupting while I placed the brochure, photographs, tax records, and property maps across her conference table. She studied each page for several minutes before looking up. "Have they ever shown you a recorded easement?" she asked. Never, I answered. A lease? No. Any written agreement signed by your family? I shook my head. Nothing. She leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. Then we stay patient. We do not argue with advertisements. We ask them to produce documents. That advice sounded almost too simple. It was exactly what we needed. Before I left her office, Rowena prepared a certified letter addressed to the Crescent Quay board requesting that they immediately stop selling access, remove inaccurate marketing material, identify any recorded easement they believed existed, and preserve every email, contract, and financial record connected to the program. Every sentence was calm. Every sentence mattered. Certified mail creates a timeline that opinions cannot erase. 2 days later, the return receipt showed someone at the management office had accepted the letter. We waited for a real answer. Instead, an email arrived from Maribel stating that the lake had been historically understood as part of the community experience and that residents had relied on that understanding for years. I read the message twice. It mentioned tradition. It mentioned expectations. It mentioned community spirit. It never mentioned a deed. It never mentioned an easement. It never mentioned ownership. Silence can be revealing. Rowena smiled when she finished reading it. She just told us what she does not have, she said quietly. People with documents usually attach them. We saved the email, printed a copy, and added it to the growing file. The folder was becoming thicker every week, and with every new page the argument became less emotional and more factual. That was exactly where I wanted it. Meanwhile, I still saw blue windshield stickers appearing near my road almost every weekend, and every one of them reminded me that the people driving those vehicles were not my real opponents. They were customers who believed they had purchased something legitimate. Someone had taken their money. Someone had made promises. Someone expected me to solve the problem by surrendering property that had never been for sale. I already knew that was not going to happen. The first weekend after Rowena mailed the certified letter, my phone buzzed before sunrise with 3 motion alerts from the gate camera. I opened the live feed expecting to see a delivery truck or maybe a neighbor who had taken a wrong turn, but instead I watched 2 sport utility vehicles slow down just enough for the drivers to wave blue windshield passes toward each other before continuing down my private gravel road as if they had done it a dozen times already. Nobody was trying to hide. That made it worse. They believed they belonged there because somebody had sold them that belief. I drove down to the dock without rushing because I had already decided something important. I was not going to turn ordinary families into the villains of this story. By the time I arrived, a father was helping his young son carry 2 fishing rods while another couple unloaded bright orange kayaks from the roof of their vehicle. They smiled when they saw me, and one man even waved. "Beautiful place," he said. The pass was worth every penny. I looked at the blue sticker on his windshield and realized he probably had no idea that he was standing on private property. "Can I ask who sold you the pass?" I said. He answered without hesitation. "The HOA office. They told us this was one of the best benefits in the neighborhood." I nodded politely. "Would you mind if I took a picture of the pass? I am trying to straighten something out." He handed it to me without any concern. It listed an annual fee, a pass number, and community rules about keeping the shoreline clean. It never identified the legal owner of the lake. That detail was missing. I thanked him, photographed both sides with his permission, and handed it back. Nobody argued. Nobody raised a voice. Before leaving, I quietly said, "I am not upset with your family. I think somebody forgot to tell you an important part of the story." They packed up and left without trouble, looking more confused than offended. Sometimes calm creates more questions than anger ever could. When I returned to the cabin, I copied the photographs into the evidence folder, labeled them with the exact date and time, and matched them to the camera footage from the entrance gate. Rowena had asked me to keep everything organized because a courtroom prefers timelines over emotions. Every file received a number. Every photograph received a description. Every receipt stayed in chronological order. Order matters. The following Tuesday, another surprise arrived. A landscaping contractor parked near the entrance and began measuring beside the road, while another employee unloaded wooden posts from a trailer. I walked over before anyone started digging. "Morning," I said. "Can I help you with something?" The foreman smiled and pulled folded paperwork from his truck. "We are installing directional signs for the lake access area. The homeowners association approved everything." I asked one simple question. Did anyone verify that the property owner approved the work? He looked down at the paperwork again and slowly shook his head. We were told the board handled that. I showed him my driver's license, a copy of the property survey from the folder I kept in my truck, and the parcel map on my tablet. Then I explained that the road belonged to my family and that there was an active legal dispute over access. He listened carefully. He did not argue. I appreciate you telling me, he said. I am calling my office before we unload another post. That conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it prevented another problem from growing. Contractors usually rely on the information they receive. Good contractors also stop when ownership becomes uncertain. That afternoon, the foreman emailed me confirming his crew had suspended the work until the ownership issue was clarified. I saved the email immediately. Written confirmation is always better than a handshake. By the end of the week, my camera recorded more vehicles with blue passes, but it also showed something new. Maribel herself stopped at the entrance one afternoon, stepped out of her sport utility vehicle, looked directly at the new private property signs, and took several photographs before driving away. She had seen the notices with her own eyes. She could never claim she did not know they existed. That mattered. Later that evening, Rowena called after reviewing the newest files. You have done exactly what you needed to do, she said. You warned people. You documented everything. You stayed professional. If this continues, nobody will be able to say they were never informed. I looked across the water as the last light faded behind the trees and realized the fight was changing. At first it had been about proving ownership. Now it was becoming about proving that every opportunity to correct the mistake had been ignored. Those are two very different cases, and the second one is much harder to explain away. The file on Rowena's conference table was no longer a simple folder by the time October arrived. It had grown into 3 thick binders separated by colored tabs, each one holding a different piece of the story that nobody at Crescent Quay seemed willing to tell. One binder held every property record we had gathered. Another contained photographs, camera logs, maintenance receipts, and certified mail records. The third was reserved for everything the Homeowners Association had created themselves. That last binder became the most interesting one. Paper has a way of revealing what people forget they said. Felix Bram Atwater finished the certified survey early that week, and he spread the large map across the conference table with the kind of care normally reserved for old artwork. Every property line matched the county parcel records. Every shoreline marker lined up with the original legal description from the 1960s. The gravel road, the dock, the boathouse, and the entire lakebed all rested inside the Renshaw parcel, without a single section crossing into Crescent Quay property. There was no gray area. Felix tapped one corner of the map with his pencil. If someone wants to disagree with this, he said, they will need better records than the county has. Nobody did. Rowena smiled, but did not celebrate. Facts are strongest when they stay quiet, she said. Let the other side explain theirs first. That afternoon, she requested another set of public records from the county planning office, including every permit, dedication record, and easement connected to the surrounding parcels. The response arrived faster than either of us expected. There was no recorded recreational easement. There was no public dedication of the road. There was no lease allowing community access. There was not even an application suggesting one had ever existed. Missing records can be just as important as existing ones. While those searches continued, I spent another weekend maintaining the gravel road the same way I had for years, filling shallow washouts with fresh stone and clearing branches left behind after a windy night. I photographed the work before and after it was finished because Rowena reminded me that maintenance receipts help prove continuing responsibility for private property. Ownership is not only about a deed. It is also reflected by who pays the bills year after year. The receipts went into the binder beside invoices stretching back almost a decade. Patterns matter. 3 days later, Rowena called and asked me to stop by her office immediately because several documents had arrived through the discovery process. She already had them spread across her desk when I walked in. The first pages looked harmless enough. They were copies of promotional brochures showing families fishing, kayaking, and enjoying sunrise on the water. Then she slid another document toward me. It was a packet explaining the Lake Heritage Pass program, complete with numbered passes, annual fees, community rules, and instructions telling residents where to park before walking onto my dock. I stared at the pages for several seconds without speaking. Somebody had turned my property into a membership benefit. It became even stranger. Another spreadsheet listed payments collected from 34 households along with deposit totals matching the exact amount of revenue generated by the past program. Every payment had been carefully recorded. Every dollar had been counted. Rowena turned one more page. Now we know this was never an accident, she said quietly. It was an organized program. We still did not know why the board had taken such a risk, but the answer arrived before the week ended. Discovery produced internal emails between Maribel, the community treasurer, and the management company. One message from the treasurer warned that the association should not sell access until legal rights had been verified because ownership remained unresolved. Another email from the management company recommended obtaining either a written lease or a recorded easement before collecting any money connected to the lake. Those warnings were clear. They had been ignored. Then came the message that changed the entire direction of the case. Maribel replied to both of them with a short sentence that sounded more like a business strategy than a legal opinion. She wrote, "Once residents are using the lake, Renshaw will have to negotiate." The room went completely quiet after I finished reading it. Nobody needed to explain what that sentence meant. The plan had never been to prove ownership. The plan had been to create enough public pressure that giving up part of my property would seem easier than fighting back. They were counting on frustration. They were not expecting documentation. Rowena carefully placed the printed email into a protective sleeve before labeling it as a key exhibit. "This is not about neighbors enjoying the outdoors anymore," she said. "This is about selling something they knew they did not control." She closed the binder with a calm smile that told me we had finally reached the turning point. For the first time since that white sport utility vehicle rolled onto my gravel road, I felt like the truth was no longer catching up. It was beginning to pull ahead. By the middle of October, our case had stopped growing wider and started growing deeper. We already knew who owned the land, who maintained the road, and who had been collecting money, but Rowena kept reminding me that winning in court rarely depended on having one dramatic document. It depended on building a chain that could not be broken. Every record had to support the next one. Every date had to match. Every statement had to fit the facts. That was exactly what we spent the next several days doing. Felix returned with the certified survey mounted on a large display board almost 4 feet wide. Bright colored boundary lines traced every edge of the Renshaw parcel, while smaller labels identified the dock, the boathouse, the shoreline, and the gravel road leading from the county highway. There were no overlapping parcels. There were no disputed corners. There were no mysterious gaps where someone could claim ownership had become uncertain. Felix looked at me and smiled. "Maps cannot solve every argument," he said, "but they can end a lot of stories people tell themselves." He was right. Rowena compared the survey against county tax records, historical deeds, and the original legal description filed decades earlier. Every measurement matched. Every transfer in the chain of title pointed to the same conclusion. My family had never sold the lake, never dedicated the road to public use, and never granted recreational access to Crescent Quay. That consistency mattered more than any speech someone could give at a board meeting. Documents do not get nervous. Next came another response from the county records office. This time the clerk certified that no public dedication had ever been recorded for Renshaw Lake Road, and that no recreational easement benefiting Crescent Quay Estates existed anywhere in the official land records. Rowena highlighted one sentence before handing me the page. "If an easement is not recorded when the law requires one," she said, "people cannot simply pretend it exists because it would be convenient." That was another quiet lesson my father would have appreciated. Ownership and permission are not the same thing. Even if someone has permission to cross private property for one limited reason, that does not give them the right to charge admission, advertise access, lease the privilege, or turn it into a business. The scope of an easement matters just as much as its existence. That afternoon, we organized every maintenance invoice I had saved over the years. Receipts for gravel deliveries, culvert repairs, tree removal after storms, gate installation, replacement hinges, drainage work, and annual insurance premiums covered almost an entire conference table. Rowena arranged them in chronological order until the pattern became obvious. "These bills tell a story," she said. "The person paying to maintain a road year after year usually believes he owns it, and the records show that belief was justified." We scanned every page again, created digital copies, and attached the invoices to the legal timeline. Nothing was left to memory. A few days later, another discovery package arrived from the Homeowners Association. Buried inside dozens of ordinary emails and meeting notes was something neither of us expected. Someone had circulated an updated neighborhood map showing my gravel road under a completely different name. Instead of Renshaw Lake Road, the brochure labeled it as Crescent Lake Road with decorative arrows leading visitors toward the water. There was no county approval for that new name. There was no recorded change. It existed only inside the association's marketing material. Rowena placed the brochure beside the official parcel map, and the difference was impossible to miss. One showed legal ownership. The other showed a marketing idea. Changing the name on a brochure does not change the owner, she said calmly. Paperwork filed with the county controls property rights, not colorful graphics. We also notified the association's insurance carrier that a legal dispute involving unauthorized recreational access and potential liability was now supported by certified surveys and official county records. We were not trying to create trouble for anyone. We were making sure every organization connected to the situation had accurate information before someone was injured or another family purchased something that did not legally exist. Transparency protects everyone. By the end of that week, the binders had become so complete that even I was surprised by how clearly the timeline unfolded from beginning to end. The original deed led to the tax records. The tax records matched the survey. The survey matched the parcel map. The parcel map matched the maintenance history. The maintenance history matched the photographs and camera footage. Then the Homeowners Association's own brochures and emails filled in the final pieces. Nothing depended on guessing anymore. As Rowena closed the last binder, she slid a neatly prepared packet across the table. It was the motion requesting an injunction along with damages supported by every document we had assembled. She looked at me with the same calm expression she had worn since our first meeting. "We are finished chasing the facts," she said. "Now the facts are going to lead the case." I picked up the packet, and for the first time since this entire dispute had begun, I felt something stronger than frustration. I felt ready. The court hearing was still several weeks away, but the most important work was happening long before anyone walked into a courtroom. Rowena kept reminding me that judges do not wake up hoping for dramatic speeches. They look for facts that fit together without forcing them. That became our entire strategy. Every morning began with another review of the evidence, another phone call, or another document added to the timeline, and every evening ended with the growing feeling that the story the Homeowners Association had been telling was becoming harder for them to defend. The discovery process continued producing records that nobody outside the board had ever seen before. Most of the emails were ordinary discussions about landscaping contracts, holiday decorations, and budget meetings, but hidden between those routine conversations were messages that slowly revealed why the past program had moved forward even after people raised legal concerns. The community treasurer had written more than once that the association's reserve fund had fallen behind after an expensive swimming pool renovation and several large landscaping projects. Annual dues alone were no longer covering projected expenses. The numbers were simple. The pressure was real. Then another message explained that the new lake access program would create additional revenue without increasing dues before the next board election. Suddenly, every piece started fitting together. This was never only about the lake. It was about money, reputation, and keeping residents happy without asking them to pay higher assessments. One email from the management company stood out immediately because it carried a clear warning. The property manager advised the board not to market recreational access until legal rights had been verified through either a recorded easement or a written lease with the property owner. The language was polite but direct. They were being told to slow down. They chose not to. Maribel answered the email only a few hours later. Her reply was shorter than anyone expected. She wrote, "If residents begin using the lake, negotiating later becomes much easier." I read that sentence 3 times before looking up at Rowena. Neither of us spoke for several seconds because there was nothing left to interpret. The plan had been written in plain English. Pressure first, permission later. That changed the case. We immediately placed the email beside every certified notice we had already sent because together they created a timeline that was impossible to ignore. First they were warned internally. Then they were warned by me. Then they continued anyway. That sequence mattered more than any emotional argument ever could. Good timelines leave very little room for excuses. Felix continued helping us in quieter ways that turned out to be just as important. He visited the property one last time to photograph every survey marker, every corner monument, and every entrance point shown on the certified survey. He even measured the distance from the county highway to the private dock, so every photograph could be matched to the official map if anyone questioned where it had been taken. Small details become powerful when they all point in the same direction. While he worked, I kept doing exactly what I had been doing since the beginning. I maintained the road, saved every receipt, recorded every maintenance expense, and preserved every camera file showing vehicles entering with blue windshield passes. I never confronted another family. I never blocked anyone inside the property. I never raised my voice. Rowena explained why that mattered. The people buying those passes are not the ones making legal decisions, she told me. If we treat innocent residents with respect, the evidence stays focused on the people who created the problem. That advice stayed with me because it felt right long before it became useful in court. One afternoon, the landscaping contractor who had stopped work weeks earlier called me again. He wanted to let me know that his company had officially withdrawn from installing additional signs after reviewing the property records. "We are not choosing sides," he said. "We just need clear owner authorization before we build anything." I thanked him because his decision reflected something many people forget. Honest businesses usually want accurate paperwork more than quick jobs. Before hanging up, I asked if he would mind confirming that conversation in an email. He laughed softly and said, "Already sent." Sure enough, the message appeared in my inbox a few minutes later. Another document joined the binder. By the end of October, Rowena arranged every exhibit in the exact order she planned to present it at the hearing. The deed came first, then the chain of title, then the certified survey, then the county parcel map. After that came the maintenance records, the certified notices, the camera photographs, the pass agreements, the promotional brochures, the financial spreadsheets, and finally the internal emails that explained why all of it had happened. She stepped back from the conference table and looked across the neatly organized stacks of paper. "There is a difference," she said quietly, "between building a story and uncovering one. We did not invent this timeline. They wrote it themselves." Looking at those binders, I realized the coming hearing was no longer about proving who owned the lake. That question had already been answered by years of records. The hearing would be about something much simpler. What happens when someone knowingly sells a right they never had to sell in the first place? The hearing began on a cold Monday morning with none of the drama people expect from television. There were no surprise witnesses bursting through the courtroom doors and no emotional speeches before the evidence even appeared. There were only binders, maps, sworn testimony, and a judge who had clearly read the filings before anyone spoke. That quiet atmosphere actually worked in our favor because this case had never depended on excitement. It depended on records. Rowena arranged our exhibits across the presentation table in the exact order we had practiced for days. The certified survey rested beside the original deed. The county parcel map sat next to decades of tax records. Maintenance invoices filled another binder, while the camera photographs, certified notices, promotional brochures, and internal emails occupied the final stack. Every document had a purpose. Every page connected to another page. Judge Imogene Faye Westcott entered the courtroom, greeted both sides, and immediately focused everyone on the legal questions instead of the emotions surrounding the dispute. Maribel sat confidently with counsel representing the Homeowners Association, and several residents quietly filled the gallery seats behind her. I recognized a few of the families who had visited the lake earlier that fall. They looked nervous more than anything else. I understood why. They had paid money believing they were buying something legitimate. They deserved answers just as much as I did. Rowena began with the simplest exhibit in the room. She placed the original deed on the display screen and slowly walked the court through the chain of title from the 1960s until today. Each transfer was recorded. Each legal description matched the next. Nothing had been skipped. Nothing had been altered. Then she introduced the certified survey prepared by Felix Bram Atwater. Felix explained how he confirmed every boundary marker, every corner monument, every shoreline measurement, and every section of Renshaw Lake Road before signing his report. Using the enlarged parcel map, he traced the property lines with a pointer. "The dock is here," he said calmly. "The shoreline follows this line. The boathouse is here. The road begins at the county highway and remains entirely within the Renshaw parcel until it reaches the lake. He paused before adding one more sentence. None of these improvements are located on property owned by Crescent Quay Estates. The courtroom remained completely quiet. Next came the county records certification. Rowena introduced the official response confirming there was no recorded recreational easement, no public dedication of the private road, and no written lease granting the association authority to operate recreational access across my property. She did not raise her voice. She simply let the documents speak. Then she displayed the promotional brochure showing smiling families beside the lake under the heading promising exclusive access for pass holders. Beside that brochure, she projected the official parcel map. The difference between marketing and legal ownership became obvious to everyone in the room. A colorful brochure had renamed my road. County records never had. That distinction mattered. Rowena then introduced the gate camera photographs and maintenance records. The images showed vehicles displaying blue windshield passes entering my private road over multiple weekends. The maintenance invoices demonstrated that I alone had continued paying for gravel, drainage repairs, culvert work, gate maintenance, insurance, and storm cleanup year after year. The timeline was impossible to ignore. The same person maintaining the road also owned it. The same organization selling access had never maintained it. Then the deputy who had responded to the original call testified. He described arriving at the property after receiving a complaint that I was interfering with community lake access. He explained that I had immediately presented identification, current tax records, and a copy of the recorded deed before asking him to verify the parcel map through county records. He asked me to check the documents, the deputy said. He did not ask me to take his word for it. That statement carried more weight than I expected because it showed exactly how the dispute had begun. Facts first, opinions second. Finally, Rowena opened the binder containing the discovery emails. She first presented the management company's warning recommending that the association obtain a written lease or recorded easement before selling recreational access. She followed it with the treasurer's email expressing concern that ownership remained unresolved. Then she displayed Maribel's reply on the courtroom screen. The sentence was short enough for everyone to read without assistance. Once residents are using the lake, Renshaw will have to negotiate. Nobody interrupted the silence that followed. Judge Westcott looked toward the association's table before asking one carefully worded question. Can you identify the deed, recorded easement, lease, license, or other legal instrument that authorized your association to sell recreational access to this property? Counsel reviewed several folders before quietly answering that no such recorded document existed. The judge nodded once and turned another page in her notes. In that moment, the entire balance of the case shifted without anyone raising their voice. The discussion was no longer about tradition, community expectations, or marketing language. It had returned to the one place property disputes always return in the end. The official records. And every official record pointed in exactly the same direction. Judge Westcott did not announce her decision with dramatic pauses or theatrical speeches. She simply read through the findings one careful point at a time, and every sentence rested on a document that had already been admitted into the record. The court found that Crescent Quay Estates had failed to prove any ownership interest, recorded easement, lease, or legal authority allowing it to sell recreational access across my property. The pass program was declared invalid because the association had offered rights it did not legally possess. The facts had done their job. Then the consequences began. The court ordered the association to stop advertising, selling, promoting, or directing anyone toward Greyhook Lake or Renshaw Lake Road for recreational use. Every remaining Lake Heritage Pass was voided. Revenue connected to the program was frozen until the funds could either be returned to the families who purchased the passes or placed into an escrow account under the court's supervision while the refund process was completed. The order also awarded damages covering documented road wear, dock repairs, survey expenses, attorney fees, and the measurable loss of my private use during the months the dispute continued. Every amount had supporting records. Every dollar could be traced. That mattered. One detail stood out more than anything else. Judge Westcott made it clear that the residents who bought the passes were not being treated as wrongdoers because they had relied on representations made by their association. They had purchased something believing it was legitimate. The responsibility rested with the people who had created and sold the program without legal authority. I respected that distinction because it matched the approach Rowena had insisted on from the beginning. We never built our case against neighbors. We built it around documents. Within days, the changes became visible throughout the community. The promotional brochures disappeared from the sales office. The large display map showing recreational access was removed. Correction notices were mailed to homeowners explaining that previous marketing materials had inaccurately described private property rights. The association also announced an independent financial audit after residents began asking where the past revenue had gone and why repeated legal warnings had not been followed. Questions that had once been ignored suddenly demanded answers. At the next special board meeting, Maribel resigned as president after a vote replaced several leadership positions. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Most people simply wanted the community to move forward honestly. That seemed like the healthiest outcome anyone could hope for. A week later, I drove to the entrance of my property, carrying nothing more than a wrench and a small toolbox. The temporary sign that had declared the area reserved for pass holders was still standing beside my gate exactly where it had been placed months earlier. I loosened the bolts one by one, lifted the sign into the bed of my old pickup truck, and looked down the quiet gravel road leading toward the lake. The only sounds were wind moving through the sycamore trees and water touching the edge of the dock. Everything felt familiar again. Peace returned quietly. Early the next morning, I carried a cup of coffee to the same cedar dock where my father had taught me to fish so many years before. The sunrise looked exactly the way I remembered, and for the first time in months there were no unfamiliar vehicles, no confusing signs, and no arguments waiting at the end of the road. I realized the most valuable thing I had protected was not the market value of the property. It was the simple certainty that truth does not have to shout when it is supported by patient work and honest records. Looking back now, I sometimes think about how easily this story could have ended differently if I had answered frustration with more frustration. Instead, every photograph, every receipt, every certified letter, every survey, and every county record quietly carried the weight that emotions never could. That is one reason I wanted to tell this dramatized story. Not because every detail will match every real dispute, but because the lesson remains worth remembering. Property rights are strongest when they are documented, evidence is more dependable than assumptions, and disagreements are far more likely to end fairly when people choose lawful steps instead of louder voices. Those are lessons my father trusted long before this happened, and after everything that followed, I trust them even more.